Please support the channel with the link directly below that allows me to be able to provide you this information. If you like the charts, you like the indicators, let me know that by supporting the channel today. You can take a moment to help out. I would really appreciate it. I don't have any sponsors, just a direct relationship with you. Follow the link below to take you to a secured site, and you can donate any amount you want. Anything helps. So please consider partnering with me today. I really would appreciate you taking a moment to do that. If you watch the video all the way through, I'll be talking shortly about my signals. I got warning signals as we're slamming into major resistance on the S&P and the NASDAQ. S&P's hitting the 2018 trend line. NASDAQ's hitting the 2020 trend line. S&P's also hitting that trend line from the 2023 low. But the signals have not yet been confirmed, with trend signals turning back to bearish. If you watch the video all the way through, I will show you those signals. I'll show you that just a little bit later in the video. In my last update, I talked about how we closed the week out. On Friday we closed the week out getting these candles of indecision in the weekly time frame, slamming up into major resistance. Like here on the NASDAQ, you got a spinning top. We got spinning tops or dojis on the Dow, the Russell, the S&P 500, and the NASDAQ. Either a spinning top or a doji, one or the other, slamming into major resistance. So here's the NASDAQ. Here is the S&P 500, a doji spinning top looking candlestick. NASDAQ's clearly a spinning top. The open, the close, very close to one another. A doji looking, a doji spinning top looking candlestick as we're slamming up into resistance levels. S&P weekly right here. As we're getting those candles of indecision, we're slamming up into the trend line right here from the 2020 low on NASDAQ. I talked about this in great length and detail in my last update. Every time you hit this trend line, you get a dramatic drop, nearly 16% in the summer of 2024. In 2025, we slammed into it in December, late 2024, and got the 2025 sell-off after a divergence formed between the December high and the February high. Again, you're likely going to see something happen right here. We've got the massive broadening formation. So talked about all of this with those candles of indecision. This is the NASDAQ. And if I bring up the daily chart, you can see we slammed up right into the trend line. This is the broadening formation closer up in the daily time frame from the July 2024 peak. Hit it again in December, and we're hitting it right now. Now, the way it can play out is we could turn off the trend line and just start going lower, and then we'll need to see signals validated. We need to see the signals all begin to turn bearish. We got the candle of indecision on the weekly chart. We got to get a confirmation of that, a down week next week. Told you the jobs report next week, next Friday, and then we'll get the private payrolls earlier in the week on Wednesday. The jobs report, if it comes in good, then the market's going to sell off. Why does the Fed need to cut? The Fed is, cutting rates, starting to cut rates again, citing the GDP, which has now had the largest surge. We've had the best performance in GDP in the 2 years after Powell told us how bad it was. At that 3.8% with the third estimate earlier in this last week here. We've seen deterioration in the labor market. What if it improves? It's not expected to be a strong number. When if it comes in stronger, then the market's going to sell off. If it comes in a weak number or a negative number, the market's going to sell off. Fear of recession. No matter how the jobs report comes in, the market's likely going to sell off with it. Now, the two possibilities I'm going to be talking about in this video for the NASDAQ is we turn off this trend line, signals validate it, they turn bearish, and we start moving towards the 200 period moving average. Some Fibonacci retracements. I talked about the Fibonacci retracements in my last update. The other possibility is signals don't turn bearish. We go back up and we slam up into that trend line one more time, and we get a little tiny divergence right here in the most recent price action. Again, my signals are still bullish. We've sold off. We broke the winning streak. We turned off of the high. We turned off of this trend line, but my signals have not validated a reversal. So I think it's going to play out one way or the other, where you're going to slam into the trend line again and get this little tiny divergence here. Or we're going to validate my signals and we're going to start selling off. And if we validate my signals, then divergence isn't going to form. Now we had this divergence over here give us this short-term peak right here back to the 50-period moving average. This RSI high actually went higher than that peak right there. S&P still got a divergence, multiple point divergence, but this RSI, you're going to just reach an extreme and begin to sell off. We reached an extreme here. There was no divergence, and you began this rally. You're going to get a divergence like what we had here. We had divergences back over here at this February peak, and we had a divergence back over here at the July peak. So again, either we're going to go slam up into the trend line one more time and then turn, or you're going to just validate the signals as we go into next week at some point. Stop making new highs. So I'm watching this trend line very carefully. Again, my signals are still bullish. I'm looking at the resistance here and the candlesticks that we got. So I don't know which way it will play out, whether we get a divergence here or whether we validate my signals. I did get topping signals right here, but I may get them again. We may form a divergence and we may get a double dose of topping signals if we try to form a divergence right there. The MACD has rolled over on the S&P 500. It is not yet rolled over on the NASDAQ. Just something to be aware of. Do we get something like this where we just start turning down and here we just start turning up with no diversions? Or do we get diversions like what we had back over here? So that's what I'll be watching on the NASDAQ and S&P 500. Do we get confirmation of the candles of indecision? S&P turning off of the upper boundary of the rising wedge. Do we get a bigger rally up and get a lower high or try to make a new high? We just come back to fill the gap here and we resume the decline, eventually taking out the low here from this week. S&P stall here at the 50 period and the cloud, or get a bigger retracement to try to get a back test or a throwback to the breakdown of the rising wedge, or do we try to challenge the high? So I'll be watching those candlesticks in the weekly time frame. How do we close by the end of next week? Mercedes turned back up with getting this rebound back up, but we're stalling at the cloud here on the 60-minute chart. We're stalling at the 50 period, and we're still in negative territory. The RSI has moved up to just above 50 here on the 60-minute chart. So again, going to be watching, does this high right here hold on our rising wedge? And we're turning off of the resistance there, formed that doji last week. At this resistance, and on the S&P have this resistance, as I talked about in my previous update, again, the 2018 trend line, the upper boundary parallel to the blue trend line from this low to this low, not touching these other lows over here, and we're slamming up into that trend line and from our 2023 low, the trend line right there. If we exclude the low here and just touch this point, that's the trend line that we're hitting. We've just slightly overthrew it there. So we're hitting some resistance. If we turn down, we can see a Fibonacci retracement or a pullback towards the 200 period moving averages in the daily time frame. So just a quick review of my previous update, and I wanted to. The NASDAQ and S&P this last week got the same signals that Bitcoin got the previous week with the Fed meeting. Bitcoin got an immediate post-Fed sell-off. The rate cut was already priced in. At options expiration, stock market went higher, Bitcoin began to sell off. And I told you the stock market could start the reversal with a post-Fed sell-off the following week. That doji could be the start of it. We broke the winning streak. We still went higher to start the week off, but we didn't end there. We sold off, and then we rebounded back up on Friday, fill Thursday's gap, and that gave us that spinning top on the NASDAQ. That gave us the doji on the S&P. Dow and the Russell got one as well. Candle of indecision. This is Bitcoin's daily chart. Bitcoin already got the reversal. The reversal signal showed up right after the Fed. Now we're getting it this week on the S&P and the NASDAQ. And the same signal at the August top and at the July peak. I want to see my latest Bitcoin video, and I show all the signals for Bitcoin, how it's probably going down lower towards 100,000. I still think it's going to have a good fourth quarter. I think the stock market's going to have a good fourth quarter. I think we get an October bottom. Bitcoin is probably going to bottom before the market. It's going to lead the market lower. Market's going to play catch up. So too, as Bitcoin got this signal, so too now we're seeing it begin to show up on NASDAQ and S&P 500. Reversal signal played out nicely with Bitcoin. Since the reversal signal here in August, we've dropped 14%. We've rallied back up. Signals part of that, I turned short-term bullish on Bitcoin, but then September 18th turned back to bearish on Bitcoin, and Bitcoin since then dropped about 8%. So again, it's likely going to take out this low at 107,000, and again, the market is likely going to catch up to Bitcoin. I got several topping signals for the NASDAQ and S&P this week, but they have not yet been confirmed. Great Scott, did you hear what I said? They have not yet been confirmed. They have to be confirmed. The risk is that we get more than one signal. NASDAQ goes up and tries to form a divergence on the RSI and other indicators, and we get a reversal signal here, and it's followed by another reversal signal as we go slam up into the trend line of the broadening formation one more time. That's assuming that the dojis are not confirmed, or they could be confirmed if we end up going higher. The bearish engulfing following the doji, end up confirming it by the end of the week with the jobs report. We'll be watching to see how it plays out. There's major resistance, though, with the upper boundary of the broadening formation. So we're getting the same signal. We got it on Tuesday. Bitcoin got it the previous week right after the Fed. We got it here on NASDAQ in the bullish signal in September. So again, does this produce the reversal, or do we go up and get another signal? So far, the signal's playing out, but do we get back-to-back reversal signals and end up forming a divergence on the RSI or other indicators? I've got the signal on NASDAQ. I got the same signal on the S&P, but it has not been validated. My signals are still bullish. My signals have to turn back to bearish if this signal is to be validated. Got the same signal on the S&P 500, reversal signal. It's given us a sell-off. It was correct. Is it just a small sell-off here and we go back and we end up trying to get a divergence, or does this high hold? S&P already has multiple point divergences. Still may get one in the recent price action unless my signals begin to validate it. Right now, my signals have not validated this reversal. So far, it's not validated. Again, we got the same signal in September with the September run up and formed the rising wedges. We're slamming into the trend lines of resistance with the rising wedge, the weekly trend lines that I've shown you on the S&P's weekly chart. The question, the $64,000 question is, will these signals be validated in the daily time frame, and will the weekly candlesticks be confirmed by the close of this coming week here we're now moving into? Just be aware of that. Now, again, we could see back-to-back bearish signals on S&P if it doesn't get confirmed. If this doji right here, we went back to fill the gap. If we end up going back up and challenging the highs, then we may get a divergence in the most recent price action on the S&P and NASDAQ. But again, we don't. If we get a lower high, we start selling off, or go higher and then get a lower high and start selling off. You've got to confirm with my signals turning bearish. My signals remain bullish. Well, I'm getting warning signs, and not just here, but I'm getting other warning signs. Right here, the NASDAQ. Again, we got the warning sign, either pullback or reversal. Maybe we get a bigger pullback, but again, this pullback that's already happened hasn't been validated, so there's still risk of a divergence. Other signals have marked pullbacks, sideways moves. So again, the start of a bigger pullback, or is this something smaller that ends up forming a divergence? Signals have to be validated. The signal here has to be confirmed. With trend signals turning bearish, that hasn't happened yet. Got the same signal on the S&P 500. We're getting a sell-off. Does last week's high hold? And we confirm it with signals, trend signals turning bearish, or is it a mild pullback and we end up getting a larger divergence? I should say a divergence in the more recent price action on the RSI and the RSI in the daily time frame for the S&P and the NASDAQ. We did get warning signs on both the NASDAQ and S&P last week. Now we need confirmation with the trend signals turning bearish. The swing trade signals have to turn bearish, but we got warning signs. Sometimes you can get a couple warning signs. Here, signals show up, and either you got these pullbacks or you went sideways. In August, we dropped 4.28%, and then the signals reverted back to bullish. We're likely going to see the stock market play catch up to Bitcoin. The question is, do we get a divergence and go up and slam up into the broadening formation and get another reference point on the S&P of a divergence and then turn down, or does last week's highs hold? But we got these warning signs. NASDAQ daily, S&P 500 daily, same thing. Got the same warning signal, but yet signals have not yet turned bearish. That has to be confirmed. If it's not, we may get back-to-back reversal signals if divergences try to form on those RSIs and the daily time frame on NASDAQ and S&P. So I'm going to be really watching this trend line, the 2018 trend line for the S&P 500 and the 2023 trend line for the low, and this 2020 trend line right here. Again, just slamming right into it right there. Going to be watching to see if we begin to sell off. Does the candle indecision mark a peak, or do we end up getting a divergence? Maybe try to slam into it again, or which again, it's going to the right of the chart, so we could go slightly higher, even try to overthrow it. But we'll be watching to see if we sell off of this trend line, which is very, very likely. Question is really, do we get a divergence on the NASDAQ daily chart before that happens, or do we just turn with an extreme reading? Again, last time we had the extreme reading that we just got on NASDAQ at 78, you had a 16% sell-off off of this trend line. We'll be watching to see what happens. RSI is up close in the daily time frame. Again, NASDAQ turning down, getting some warning signs with our high from last week. After options expiration, we got some volatility. Here we saw the RSI reach an extreme, just like what we had back over here at the bottom. Does a divergence develop right here? Does a divergence develop and we go back up and slam up into the upper boundary of the broadening formation and then go down? Or do we get confirmation and end up having last week's high hold, stop making new highs, and confirm a reversal? So I'm watching this. Now, the MACD has not rolled over yet on the NASDAQ. It did roll over on the S&P 500. So watching that RSI here. But if we get confirmation, then we may not form that divergence here in the most recent price action. We went slightly above this peak over here, the peak over right there that formed this divergence. Had a triple divergence, but we moved higher. Either now you have a new extreme like we had down here at the bottom, or you're going to form a divergence in the most recent price action and slam up into the trend line again, the broadening formation. If we do that, we still may sell off before the week ends with the jobs report. S&P did get the MACD rolling over, but we have a very similar divergence, multiple point divergence like we did back over here at the February high. S&P still has the divergence. Do we get one in the most recent price action? Do we go back up and hit maybe this trend line right here? NASDAQ goes back up and slams up into the trend line, and we end up seeing these divergences in the most recent price action, and then we tank going into October, going towards earnings season being kicked off in October. That's a scenario that buys us more time if we don't confirm my signals. We're right now bouncing off the 20-period moving average here, the blue line, and we got back above the 10-period, and we're bouncing off the cloud. So if we are going to sell off, we need to take out the 20. We need to take out the momentum cloud, which has been acting as support, and we need to start moving back towards the 50 and towards the trending cloud, and eventually make our way down towards the 100 or 200 period moving average. You have horizontal support right there at the 6150 area. You have the 200 at the 6,000 area, and this is where I talked about the Fibonacci's. If we get a 10% sell-off like we had in July 2024, remember we're slamming up into the trend lines in the weekly time frame. We still could hit this one more time, but by 2024 we dropped 10%. That would take us back to the 200 period moving average. So wanted to continue to monitor the RSI here in the daily time frame, but I did get some topping signals at this peak right here that we had last week, and we've moved down to the 20 period here, but the signals have not yet been validated with trend signals turning bearish. We had warning signs with last week's peaks The signals have not yet been confirmed. Here's NASDAQ daily chart, not yet confirmed. Signals have been consistently bullish since the April low. After the April low, we saw signals all begin to turn back to bullish. In the summer, we had some volatility with NASDAQ, but signals in September have reverted right back to bullish. They have to turn bearish in order to confirm the signals that I'm showing you. It has not yet happened. Watching the dojis and the resistance trend lines, especially that upper boundary of the broadening formation from the 2020 low on NASDAQ, do we turn off of that with the spinning top candlestick and the dojis that we're seeing on the other averages? Same thing on the S&P. Signals are not validating those topping signals yet. We'll see if they do next week. Signals remain bullish here. S&P, we had some volatility in the summer, but again, signals reverted right back to bullish. Signals remain bullish. Here's the S&P daily. NASDAQ 100 daily, again, had some volatility in the summer, right back to bullish, and here we are. So again, the signals have to validate the potential topping signals. The risk is that we still see divergences develop on the RSIs in the daily time frame. If the topping signals that we got last week get validated, you're going to see my signals turn back to bearish. That means we have to take out this week's low, Thursday's low. You take that out, then you can see the signals revert back to bearish after a little bit of volatility in the summer. But if they remain bullish, then the risk is you get that divergence and slam up into resistance one more time before going lower on those weekly charts. Signals still bullish here in the S&P 500. Again, signals have been consistently bullish since the bottom. We had a little bit of volatility. The July 31st peak, signals turned right back to bullish on S&P. Signals have mostly been bullish on the S&P. NASDAQ signals turned bullish or bearish a couple of times during the summer, but S&P, we've seen them mostly remain bullish after the July downturn. Most signals reverted back to bullish and remained that way for the S&P. And if the bearish signals I'm showing you in the video are going to be confirmed, you got to flip the trend signals here back to bearish. NASDAQ signals turned bearish a couple of times over the summer on most indicators, reverted right back to bullish with the run-up in September. So again, we got to take out Thursday's lows if signals are going to turn bearish right now. Otherwise, the NASDAQ could form a divergence, slamming up into the upper boundary of the broadening formation one more time and getting more sell signals, getting a double dose of sell signals, back-to-back sell signals if a divergence ends up forming. We didn't get one at the bottom. Will we get one here? I'll be watching that next week, and I'll be watching for confirmation of those candles of indecision in the weekly time frame. Do they get confirmed and we sell off further next week? By the end of next week, do we have a close below this week's low? P, again, couldn't flip the signal. Turned bearish after the July 31st peak, turned right back to bullish, went sideways. Now we've had the September run-up. So do we validate a lower high here or a little bit higher, or do we try to form a divergence? Do we end up validating those signals or getting back-to-back reversal signals before validating and confirming a reversal? Signals remain bullish. S&P daily. Same thing for the NASDAQ. We got to take out last week's lows to resume the sell-off. Signals were not able to flip back to bearish. So the warning signals that I got, do they mark a peak and we sell off like Bitcoin did, or do we end up forming the divergences on the RSIs in the daily time frame? Those warning signals, but they've not yet been confirmed. We got to see it confirmed here with the trending signals if we're going to start a bigger sell-off. We've had some bullish things happened with the VIX. We saw the MACD turn positive. This move off of the low, we got the hollow red candlestick. We pushed back above the 50-period moving average, but we dropped back below it now. We had a 8.66% sell-off on Friday as the market rebounded back up to try to fill Thursday's gap, which it did do. The VIX, here's the S&P in the lower window. If it confirms a lower high, then the VIX can go up and try to get above the 200. I'm looking at this trend line as well, near the 200 period moving average, the peak here and the peak here, if we can resume the advance on the VIX. Now, the VIX had a move higher. It broke out above this trend line, and now it's pulled back and it's dropped back below the trend line. So what I'll be watching is does the hollow red candlestick here hold as a low, a higher low, discrepancy with the S&P? Does the MACD remain in positive territory? The last time we had this happen, where the MACD moved into positive territory, had this happen over here, where we had the peak in February of 2025, and we had that big surge in volatility above the 50. Here we got above the 50, and now we've dropped back below it. You got to stay above the 50, and you got to be able to surge and get back above the 200 if volatility is going to return. If we see market initially rally next week to form divergences and try to push up to resistance levels again, to form divergences are in the RSI in the daily time frame, then the VIX could test this low right here. If we see the stock market begin to sell off, get confirmation of the warning signals that I've talked about in this video, then we need to see the VIX turn back up and eventually try to clear this other trend line and the 200 period moving average. So a sharp drop on the VIX after going higher. I'll be watching the hollow red candlestick next week. I'll be watching, does the MACD remain in positive territory? So far it is. If it can remain in positive territory, then bad things are going to start happening in the stock market. So just be aware of the MACD signal that we got on the VIX. We're turning off of the upper band. We're throwing back, but we did lose the 50 period moving average. So again, I'll be watching. Does that MACD stay positive? Does this low hold right here with our hollow red candlestick? We got a hollow red candlestick here, and we broke out, got back above the 50 and surged. Here we got above the 50, and now we're throwing back, dropping below it. So going to be watching. The S&P form a divergence in the most recent price action on the RSI, or do we confirm the candlestick in the weekly time frame and stop making new highs, a doji that ends up marking a peak at the resistance levels I've shown you?